Actually, yeah. First of thing, you made a game. Now what? Or I will try to give a short introduction about like the main things to look into in marketing when you try to self-publish or actually don't have a publisher and want to do some marketing yourself. So a bit about myself. I'm a gamer for more than 20 years. Started with games such as Quake, Command & Conquer, Diablo 2, Warcraft 3, Stronghold, Need for Speed, and all the gold games, I would say, from late 90s and early 2000s. And then finished my master's degree in BI. BI is actually a university that established ESM in Lithuania. So I did studies in Oslo. And then I worked at Paradox Interactive, where I was responsible for marketing activities for games such as City Skylines, Battletech, Age of Wonders, Planetfall, Empire Sin, and others. And of course, many people would know Paradox Interactive from games, grand strategy games. However, I was not working with those as I'm working with external games, so to say. And currently I'm working at Flashbulb Games. That's a studio based in Copenhagen. We are approximately 35 people. And we are, well, indie studio that are self-published. And we currently have 2 games. One is Trailmakers, was released back in 2019. And that's a sandbox vehicle building game where you have bricks, similar to Lego, where you can build any kind of vehicle. And we recently released Rubber Bandits game, which is more physics-based game, which is multiplayer brawl. And today, well, this is my first talk about marketing at the association. And also I have to mention that, of course, my experience is mostly with video games in PC and console market, meaning that I know very little about mobile games marketing. However, some of the things that I will be talking will definitely apply to those as well. So this is actually just a graph about showing how video game market is growing worldwide, and definitely we can see that it's growing every single year, and the highest growth is, of course, on the mobile side. So although we are seeing the growth across all platforms, console, PC, and mobile, the fraction of PC and console is shrinking compared to, well, what we had 10 years ago. So a few things what that means for game developers and game marketers. At one point, there are more and more games released every year. They are making more money, and there are way more players as well. However, what that means is that we are fighting more and more for attention, because we are not only fighting with the games that are released in the same month or in the same year, we are actually fighting against all the backlog, because people are still playing the games that they played 10 years ago. And this is another graph and one number, which actually now shows games released per year on Steam alone. And what that means, every single week we are having 200 new games released, and that number is constantly increasing. And as I said, like now, when we look at marketing, we always look at what are the recent games that were released like last month, or maybe are coming in the next 2 months. However, the fact itself that we are having a library of games that have thousands and thousands of games on Steam alone, same on consoles, and even more so on mobile. The competition is actually increasing every single day, ultimately. So actually where to start, I think my presentation is called You Made a Game, Now What? Actually, you have to start before you write your first line of code. So that's pretty early. Unless, of course, you're making game for yourself, which is absolutely fine. But I think before you even start thinking about the idea of the game, you have to answer quite a few questions. So one is, who's your audience? What's the size of that audience? What is the market landscape? What is the player benefit? Also, what is your position statement, unique selling points, and of course, marketing requirements. I will not go into detail about too much of those, maybe only about the last one. If you plan to either self-publish or work with a publisher, marketing requirements is something that will increase your output as a developer. So for example, will you have a demo version when you release the game? Maybe there will be some kind of early access version that has to be limited. And all of those are like marketing beats that help you to decide or like to test some of the things. Maybe there has to be a camera tool that hides absolutely all UI, that you can take a trailer. Maybe there is some kind of beta testing or closed betas. All of these things will add extra hours on the development, but if you plan marketing, maybe you need to think these things way, way in advance. Now, when it comes to around alpha stage or 12 months before launch, there's a marketing strategy that I will go a bit more in detail. And then also we have beta, or 6 months before launch, we go to go-to-market plan, which are more defined with actual steps and what to do. And then finally, we have a post-launch and living marketing plan document. And actually, one interesting case story here that I have is that, as you may know, Fortnite was also actually a game that was initially planned as PvE. So that idea was that players were supposed to build a base and defend against invasions of, well, zombies or other monsters. However, at the same time, actually, there was also a rise in battle royale games. So what they did, they very, very quickly managed to scrap a lot of plans that they had initially, and they released battle royale game first as a free version instead of paid PvE version that ultimately conquered, and PvE version is something that they don't play. So that's actually an example where potentially they had a marketing strategy, they had a go-to-market plan, but they very quickly scrapped everything and very much adjusted, and now it's a success story. But that's actually more an example or exception for the general rule. So actually, let's go to the marketing strategy. So marketing strategy and vision is mostly something that you do very early in advance, and you try to define what will happen with your game in the first year and a half. So as I said, you were talking about things such as target audience, creative direction, and strategy. And that's actually not a working document. It does not really change unless anything drastic happens, and that's an example that I gave with Fortnite. So what you are expected to have in such things, or at least what you are supposed to think about, is that what is your product brief? What is the theme? What is the name? Genre, key features. Will you have the game as one single that will be updated, or will you have a very extensive DLC pack? Maybe there will be expansions, maybe there will be a spin-offs and all of that. What about localizations? Will your game will be only English, or it will have other languages? And I will come back to that as well. Pricing, again, mobile versus console versus PC. We have examples that games on mobiles are free because that's more expected in the market, and we have versions on PC that are paid. Among Us is one of the examples where they have a very different pricing plan. The idea is that they want to attract as many mobile players. On the other hand, if you want to play that on PC, you will have to pay. So what are the main other components is that also looking at competitive analysis and XY analysis, or SWOT. SWOT is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, where you look at your internal product as well as external. And XY is something that you take two main things about your game, say sandbox versus linear, or multiplayer versus single player, or dark versus light. It can be any kind of two main features, and you map your game across competitors. So you can then evaluate very quickly where you are standing out, what are the things that you can very clearly communicate that you are better than your competitor, or maybe you also can anticipate what are the threats against others. Now, key markets is something that I mentioned about, like localization, and I think this is very important to base that on data. Different consoles, different platforms, different genres are not equally distributed in markets. We have PlayStation that is way more popular in Asia, and we have then United States, or even some states in United States where Xbox is more popular. So differences are even more, how to say, great across other countries. So what we know is that some countries are very good at English. On the other hand, some countries are really prefer localization. So just to give an example, if we take Spanish language, we think firstly, of course, Spain, naturally. But also we have a huge chunk in Latin America. Same with Portuguese. We have countries such as, well, Brazil, Mexico, Uruguay, Argentina, and others that are actually speaking those countries. And they do not really prefer playing games in English. So just by localizing in some of the languages, you can actually gain an extremely huge competitor. Target audiences and key insights, same thing, is that who are your players? What's their gender? What's their age? What other games they are playing? And then player benefits. That's actually one interesting thing, because it's not the features. Just the fact itself that your game has a specific feature, if it's not interesting to the players, but it's interesting for yourself, does not help you to sell the game. And that actually goes to the fact itself is that who you're making game to. And naturally, I'm not a developer myself, but I talked with quite a few. I know that it becomes really a passion product, and some of the features are so difficult to actually let go, because the person feels that this is something that they really find passionate, whether that would be an art direction, whether that would be a feature. On the other hand, if data shows that this would not necessarily sell, then we need to make a decision whether this is something that we have opportunity and have time and resources to add, or we should move on and do something else. So why some specific player benefit is better than other games? And then campaign strategy is also the thing where I mentioned, when do you start marketing the game? There's at one point you want to build a hype. On the other hand, if you build the hype too early and then you have delays, you actually can disappoint the market. And we have, again, many different examples where games got canceled quite late, or actually were changed late as well. And then, of course, high-level targets, timeline, and budgets. This is more something that naturally, as you develop the game and you have potential budget for the development, it's extremely important to have the same budget for overall marketing activities and such. Again, this is something that you do roughly 1 year before you release the game, or maybe even earlier. So the fact itself that you do this just to evaluate whether you're moving the right direction. And as I said, this is not something that changes later on, because that will be more reflected in the marketing plan. So marketing plan itself would be your main working document in terms of how do you release and how do you market your game. And actually that's pretty not simple, but similar to marketing strategy in many ways. So at one point you of course have your marketing plan mix, which is which platforms, which regions, you are marketing, whether you are using advertising, whether you're working with influencers or PR and such. Then community plan is everything organic. So will you build a Discord community? Will you be on all social platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, Twitter, you name it? Or will you be able to focus only a few ones? And why? After that, we have social media plan. Actually, that's pretty close to community, which I mentioned. And then we have PR and events. Now, with COVID, landscape changed really drastically. We had quite a lot of GDC and other events that happened locally. Now they become online, meaning that at one point, more developers are able to attend those locally. On the other hand, competition increased as well. PR, again, this is something sometimes seen more traditional, but we still see the data that quite a lot of players are still going to gaming website to get their information or like their news about gamings. Analytics plan. This is maybe something that involves developers the most. Ultimately, can we have telemetrics and other analytical tools built into the game? How long will they play? What kind of game modes? Do they get stuck at tutorial? What are the features of the game that they play? All of this data can be used in marketing. What we found out is that many people in different countries play the game differently, meaning that if we run advertisement in Canada versus somewhere in Turkey, we can show different features. Mostly what represents or resonates with those people the best. Brand identity naturally goes very close to your visual game identity. So how we show, what we also need to do not to be too similar to other games, or maybe not too similar to other games that can have, well, negative connotations as well. High-level content plan is, again, same thing as I mentioned in terms of localization, key art, trailer, gameplay videos, all the things. Brand identity also includes, of course, together with a content plan, how your game is represented on storefronts, whether that would be Android store, like Google Play Store, iOS, console store, Steam, and such. Commercial plan is something where, of course, you need to decide how much your game will cost, and as I said, like how you ultimately making profit. Naturally, on mobile, of course, we have a situation where you are mostly potentially are expected to have a free game with additional possibilities to either remove ads or potentially buy something in-game. On the other hand, on PC, there's way more diverse, that some games are very much are premium and then having a lot of free updates, other having DLC, some are free and then having additional add-ons similar to mobile and such on. We also have, of course, streaming platforms such as Xbox Game Pass, and in that regard, you also can go with the game more of it as a service. And then timeline will also help the developers and team to know when to prepare what. Because naturally in marketing, I would say every asset and everything you need at least 3 months to prepare. So now I talked actually quite a lot of things, and I think this sounds good and interesting. On the other hand, now myself moving from a publisher side to a studio side, I know one thing that a lot of small studios maybe don't have a single marketing person, or maybe have one of them. And ultimately what that means is that there's no time and resource to pretty much do anything that I told. So where you go from that? Ultimately, to prepare marketing strategy and go-to-market plan, you probably need at least 10 or 7 people on one game. Does not mean that you have to have every single person full-time, but at least you need professionals that are really good at what they do in these particular roles. So now I marked actually in red 2 the key roles that I think are the crucial and the most important. So one is product marketing manager. Well, that's what I do. On the other hand, community manager, in my opinion, is even more important. Because ultimately, if you have strategy but you don't have implementation, then you cannot really go that far. On the other hand, if you have community manager that is good at copywriting, answering questions, knows a bit of graphic design or can use Canva and other tools, and knows a bit of strategy or can find that, you can go pretty far. Now, performance, paid digital marketing, naturally this is something that requires already external money and external budget, because that person usually will probably use 70 or 80% of your marketing budget. And then creative marketing manager is also something that, of course, very much supports performance and community managers. But if you don't have performance or paid digital marketing, maybe you don't really need creative marketing manager. So these 2 other roles is something that is less crucial, and also, as I said, is more important when you have bigger teams. Now, CRM manager would be someone that, of course, would work mostly with internal data, whether that would be email and other, let's say, internal forums and such. And then influencer manager, again, if you have a bigger team, would be the one working with both organic and paid influencers. Now, web manager and PR manager, I mark those in blue because I think these are the 2 roles that are the least resource intense and also are more like one-offs to build a website and to maintain, or like to reach out to PR. So I think these are 2 roles that are easily or like the easiest outsourced to agencies. And then marketing analytics manager is also something where, as I said, can be someone on the developer side that can just feed information to the marketing team. So if I would have to pick the one, I would definitely say small studios should invest in community manager, or to have someone to build this relationship both before releasing the game and after that. Now, one source that I actually wanted to bring you was actually one article that I will have actually a link afterwards, but this is from Victoria Tran, who is community manager of Among Us. And as you know, Among Us actually exploded quite well, and one of the facts, or at least one of the reasons, is to believe that they're a very, very good way to build their communities. So what she said in her article is that I would estimate overall marketing, including community management, to be at least 25 to 50% of your production budget. So what that ultimately means is that if you don't really have a person that you can hire, every hour spent developing the game could use about 15, 30 minutes of marketing at minimum. So you code, but at the same time, you also should maybe post on some kind of updates, whether that would be Reddit, whether that would be Discord, interacting with the community, onboarding them and such. And there's a lot of things involved in those 13 or 15 minutes. So for example, marketing strategy should be something where, as I said, you start very early and should take about 25% of your time. Building social media presence, around 20%. Community management, 30%, that Discord, email and such. Reporting and analytics, because you need to base your decisions on data, is around 15%, and all other things around 5%. So this is more applicable to when you have one person hired for the role, but of course, it's also possible to focus on some of those areas if you don't have anyone in your marketing team yet. And few of the things that I believe to be very true with both my experience and also with looking at some of the data is that one of the things that helps to define whether the game will be successful is checking the health metrics. And if you are on platforms that allows to do wish list, pre-orders, follower additions, and all of that, please check those. Naturally, there are tools that allows to show how many follower or wish list additions you have on Steam, and that actually happens way before you release the game. Naturally, if you don't have those metrics, it's also very unlikely that you will be able to sell well in the very beginning. There are exceptions, as always, but not that many. Now, first fans to success is a simple fact that, as I said, like you do all pre-work before you release the game. And what that ultimately means is that if you get enough players or enough people to download your game, in the very beginning, you can actually organically get featured on things such as top sellers, news and trendy. And that is applicable actually to most platforms. Here I'm giving example on Steam, but on the other hand, others as well. And if you get noticed that, then those fans that downloaded your game in the first 24 hours becomes an ambassadors and a huge start for you to be discovered ultimately for free, or at least with all the work that you've done before. Now, paid influencers, overrated, and here I'm actually talking about like the big influencers. And I think the fact itself is that some of the influencers will ask 50,000 or 70,000 euros for 2-hour stream. And we worked with those, and in most of the cases I found out that this does not really bring as much value as you were actually paying. So that brings also another one, organic influencers, underrated. I think it's better to spend with an agency or with a person actually to approaching 1,000 different influencers that are small, that can actually stream the game for a very small amount or potentially with the keys or with the raffles. And that 1,000 influencers with different audience and more organic and maybe closer relationships to their viewers have a bigger impact. At least that's experience that I found out. And then the final one, sale. I think one of the ultimate marketing activity is actually discounts and having those discounts at increasing levels. And again, this is mostly applicable potentially to video or like PC games. On the other hand, that can also be applicable to mobile games where you have like very huge discounts on, let's say, app purchases and so on. And it's not really a secret that you can find a lot of games that are discounted by 90% and more, potentially even. But what that actually brings, it brings people that, as I said, like would not discover you otherwise. And ultimately, even with 50% discount in the beginning, you can increase your sales by roughly 7-8 times, meaning that in the total units sold in that week, you're actually making way more money than without a sale. So you shouldn't discount, of course, too early, but with starting with 10, 20, 15, and so on, you can really make a difference to be discovered, especially before updating the game or releasing any additional content. And to the end, I also would like to bring one example from well, very personal experience. So this is actually Steam reviews on City Skylines, so the game that I did marketing for roughly 2 years or so. And in the yellow line, you can actually see the period where I was working with the game. And the game was released for roughly 5 years at that point. And the very first month, I introduced a lot of new activities, and we had the highest positive review in the month since the game launched, and that was actually quite an achievement, given that the game was 5 years old. And then, of course, we had quite a huge run with that. But on the other hand, in January, we had the largest negative review number in a month. And we actually did one thing that was pretty, I would say, scary internally, but it was something that we planned for a while. We introduced a launcher, meaning that for 3 or 4 years straight, you were able to launch the game and it was immediately starting. Now what we did for every single gamer, and we sold, I think, 5 million copies at that time, up till then, a splash screen would appear and then you have to click additional button that says play. And what happened is that in a single month, or actually in a single week, we received more than 500 negative reviews, which was way, way more than ever. And even more upsetting, especially for the developers, was the fact itself that we had comments like this, and I will try to read some of this, where ultimately 22nd of January, Paradox released an update that included their own launcher and updated end-user license agreement. Once you launch the game, it will install their launcher without consent, and malware behave, installs, or finishing your greeting and updated, and tries to gather more data. Ultimately, players were not able to decline, and it was not really clearly communicated what is the benefit for the players. And from the marketing side, we definitely saw a value in that. We were able to upsell more, we were able to communicate our news, and we were able to reach the players that we would not reach otherwise, if they are not following us on, well, Discord or Facebook. And the worst thing actually was that all those negative comments did not really come from trolls, or let's say someone that played the game for 5 hours. It actually came from people that had 700, 300, or even thousands of hours recorded. So actually, situation seemed pretty grim at that time, but on the other hand, this is actually concurrent players, and the red line actually shows that January, so we had slight drop, but not as significant in players. So although a lot of players were negative and very vocal about that, we did not really see any, or like almost no, decrease in players or purchases. And actually, short right after, we released Sunset Harbor expansion for the game, and also, of course, the pandemic started at that time. So some of that spike is also attributed to pandemic, approximately 20–25%. But what happened is actually we have our highest player numbers in a month since release, and that was, as I said, like 5 years after release, which was actually quite a significant achievement. And also, this was our best-selling DLC. So at one point, just 2 months before it seemed very grim that players are abandoning the game, that they are hating, that a lot of things are happening. But what we found out is actually that it did not really prove to be a bad case. And actually, ultimately, we succeeded. So the story is actually that you have to make some unpopular decisions, and you have to make some of the things. But as long as you base your decisions on data, usually it proves right. So now this is actually a good slide to take a picture of. And these are like the tools that I personally use almost day to day. And quite a lot of those things are mostly for Steam, or at least video games. So we have a lot of information that allows to analyze competitor, how many players are playing, how many potential profit they made, what are their SKU plans. We also have Solignome and others that allows us to see Twitch stats, who are the top influencers, what kind of games they play. And I think that's a great tool actually to find your potential influencer, organic one. When you know what kind of games they play, you can go and pitch your game if you feel that your game is more interesting for their audiences. And these are the two articles that, or like one article that I showed and another one that I think quite well summarizes how to market your game if you don't really have both external budget but also internal resources. So some of the first things to take. And I think for me, the last thing that I want to add is that marketing is not really external thing that you do. And you can do some marketing without actually players noticing that. It's really about how you think about your game, how you develop it, and how you see where it's gonna sell. So I would say, even though you are potentially, as I said, self-publishing and don't, plan to have a huge marketing blast, thinking about these things or seeing which features might be the most popular or which direction the game could go can really help you a long way. That's it. So now I will be happy to take questions.
I'll come to.
Thank you for the talk. I actually want to tell a really small story how I find Trailmakers. It was my English teacher, so it's not her mistake. I mean, she's a great teacher. I'm a bad student, so sorry for my English. But on one of our lessons, she told me about the game called Trail Makers, and it was. I never played it before, and I never heard about Flashbulb games. So it was first time when I heard about the game and played actually. And this is example of several different stories and games which I start playing. I mean, it's example of word of mouth marketing. It may be not even marketing, but it's how the game spreads. So could you give some advices, tips on these particular types of marketing? I mean, word of mouth. How to make something on developer side to make your game better in this term, so people want to share it with other people.
Yeah, definitely, and I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed the game. So I would say that goes actually back to the slide where, as I said, like, what is the marketing discipline that I find the most important in marketing is community manager. And I think one thing is that when you have the game, players actually, or a lot of players, I believe, want to feel ownership as well. And the fact itself that, as I said, we have those early adopters in the games, that they play the game and they want to share the word and they want to be the first ones to achieve something. If you support them as a developer, that really goes a long way. So just to give an example, if you have a Discord community and you have some players that are really passionate about the game, make them ambassadors, make them admins, give them ownership to actually share that word. And I think building that community, welcoming community of the game, where they share their stories, where they share their creations. In Trailmakers, we have a very, very strong community where you, of course, use Steam Workshop and can apply or like share your creations with anyone to download that. That gives that ownership and proudness in a way that you achieve potentially something that, well, never else did. And in that particular regard, you want to, of course, spread that word and bring other people as well. So I would say the more you get invested in the game, the more, of course, you want to be part of it. And then, of course, also share with your friends. So I would say it's not something or like specific thing that you can do because it's very, very organic, but it goes, of course, outside marketing as well. If you really, really like something and you are very passionate about that, well, you can do that. Now, another tool, probably not only within games, but I actually probably will give an example from potentially one of the best marketing companies worldwide, well, Apple, is that they did this very, very early on, that with every single Apple product, they started including Apple stickers. And that is the fact itself that you are a proud Apple user. You put that sticker on your car, you put that sticker on your, well, phone if you don't had iPhone before, let's say, before iPhone were released. And you had MacBook, all of that kind of gives this proudness and pretty much spreads the word instead of the company itself. So I think these are like the two things, and for games, community, definitely.
Yeah, thank you. I have one more. I'm actually a developer myself, and I'm working on a small title usually. So my friends also developers also in the same domain. So we mainly making games for Steam. And what I see that what people usually do for the marketing. Again, we are mostly developers, and we usually don't have a marketing person on the team. And I see this thought that you as a developer could hire a guy or hire a company completely off your business, completely outsourced, and this guy or this company could make your game shine in terms of marketing. Is it even possible this way somehow? I mean, without a bit of involvement from development team.
If it's without any involvement from the development team, I would say there's chances of succeeding are pretty slim. because who knows game better than the developers? So I would say there are a few things, and I can probably go back to the slide that I showed. So as I said, like some of the things, the red ones is not something that you want to hire externally, because community manager would be something that would breathe and talk your game. So that someone actually ideally should sit in the same room as the developers. Whenever there's a bug, whenever there's a new feature, whenever there is some kind of behind the scenes to share, community manager should be able to know that and share that and hype about that. And the same thing, product marketing manager would be the one that will bring the strategy. Now some other roles, performance paid, you can just hire an agency that will do the advertising. You can tell them what your game is about and they will try to shoot and, well, potentially miss or hit, but they will run advertising for you, that's no problem. Same with PR and influencer managers. Of course, you can go and work with some agencies that they would do the job and find the influencers and pitch your game and, well, contact all the PR studios. But as I said, like, that's why I have this list in this particular order. I would say the top ones are the really, really base. Because if you just run advertising, but you don't have any kind of follow-up on that, I would not really think that you go very far away. And of course, with mobile, it's a bit different because mobile has, usually, especially of course, hyper-casual games, they are very much rely on advertising. But if you are talking about Steam and console games, even if you run advertising and people are commenting on under your ad or going to forums or Reddit and they ask about the game, but you have no one to answer those questions simply because you're just running paid advertising, it will not really stick. Because this is not necessarily a product that potentially you just see and you buy. A lot of people want to hear more. They want to see that it's active, whether player community or that one. So to answer on that way, I would say the best thing is probably either to have maybe one of your developers is, well, pretty good at talking with potentially community or explaining these things, and maybe you can just even have, let's say, a Steam, well, Steam has a feature, Steam events and Steam forums. Maybe using that feature to actually say what is the roadmap for the game, what is the next features coming, so what are the bugs that you fixed or so on. Starting to interact with players there, answering any kind of their questions. So ultimately you are building this community inside, but I think this is the ultimate base. When you see that this is actually giving some kind of results, then you can expand with paid advertising and all of that, or potential influencers, PR outreach, but it's extremely important, in my opinion, to have someone internally that can help to do this follow-up with the players.
Okay, thanks. Oh, very loud. Thanks a lot. Do we have?
Yeah, hello, it was a very nice presentation. My question is, maybe you can share from your personal experience, your personal opinion, what was recently the poorest executed like marketing game and then the best, like from the big games so that we would know.
The worst, Cyberpunk, the best, Cyberpunk. No, but I mean, like, really, I think from the big games, they did two things. One, they sold the most units ever in the first week. And I think that was actually because of the marketing. They hyped it absolutely. And the game was announced way back. People did not actually forgot it. I think the mistake that Cyberpunk did, they announced too early. That's, I think, ultimately the fact. I think 1.5 years after they announced, nobody really cared about the game. They had to really restart that with a huge stars, of course, as Keanu Reeves and all of that. So I think their second wave was extremely good marketing. And we had like some platforms that we'd never seen before. For example, Opera GX browser, it also had like all over the place Cyberpunk whenever anyone launched the browser, although I don't even know if more than 10 people using that browser, but still. But it's also the worst because at one point you don't really want to overpromise anything that you actually do, and I think that's what they did. And although they sold a lot now, they are actually in the situation where reputation for the studio is quite broken in many ways. So I think definitely both worst and the best.
Thanks. Any more? Okay, couple more.
As everyone else said, thanks for the talk. It's very useful, I think, to everyone. My question is about importance of modding for PC games, and maybe you have some insights specifically from City Skylines, because I know the developers, and I know that they spend a lot of time from the development side, implementing modding support in that game. How important was that in the end?
Yeah, very good question. And I think this definitely goes outside marketing, because again, I don't have really insights how much or how difficult it is to implement. But ultimately, I would say I strongly believe that the success of City Skylines, not entirely, but to a really huge extent, is because of the mods. Because the game now became really something that it could never, ever become before, well, when it was released without mods. And I think if we even look at the community, an interesting thing what we did with City Skylines is, not to spend too much time on this, but so Paradox Interactive has approximately 12 active games. And all of those games are embedded in Paradox Interactive YouTube channel. So, except City Skylines. So we moved City Skylines and built our own YouTube channel for only that game. But the only fact why we were able to do that, because we had many creators, influencers that were playing City Skylines constantly, and we collaborated with them. And almost entirely everyone is playing with a lot of huge mods. And it allowed us to also create content, both for themselves and also on our channel, where we could actually focus on different even topics. For example, building a historic city, or building cities of 1600, or building a Japanese or Chinese garden, or building a, well, Mars station, or so on. And all of that was actually using huge amount of mods, and that also helps us to pivot the game into areas that it never was. Because without mods, of course, it would be just a contemporary city builder. But right now, we not only have expanded the types of roads, types of buildings, types of vehicles, but also managed to move into different, well, historic eras, or even, let's say, going to some extent to sci-fi and so on. And also, finally, that brings the fact itself where, as I said, like, ownership is something that is extremely powerful. So we do have a lot of people, a lot of channels, and a lot of individual players that are extremely proud of their creations. So it's not only that you play modded game, but you create mods yourself to get recognition, to get some kind of praise and all of that. And that actually becomes also free advertising to some extent, because you are showcasing not only your creation, you're showcasing the game as well. That being said, of course, you have also risks, because with almost, and that was not really applicable to City Skylines, but if we have games such as Crusader Kings, for example, or Crusader Kings 3, with mods, a lot of mods such as Game of Thrones started popping up, because naturally it's very easy to move that. And then you go into a situation where it's about, well, copyright infringement and all of that. So you need also resources to mod that. And also you have a lot of moderation on sensitive topics. So for example, nudity, well, we had, for example, City Skylines where people were putting, actually forgot the English word, but pretty much when someone wants to hang themselves, so they made a mod that you can put that on swings in City Skylines as well. And that was very, how to say, sensitive and negative, that as well. So you also have to have some kind of moderations and some risks involved. But I would say definitely for sandbox games and games that are not necessarily story-driven, but more creativity or strategy-driven, mods are extremely important.
From purely technical side, it was a lot of work.
But then I want to believe now, looking at City Skylines years from now, and I think 15 or so million copies sold, I think that was definitely worth the effort.
First of all, thank you for the amazing talk. Like wholeheartedly, because we found a lot of things that you say over a long period of time, and after investing quite a lot of money. So this is pure gold. And a quick question. So talking about the City Skylines and the launcher, you mentioned that initially there wasn't full transparency when it came to collecting user data. So did you end up addressing that and, I don't know, somehow telling the players that the data is being collected, or did you ignore that because the numbers were not so bad?
Yeah, so one clarification, when it comes to data collection, usually we did not really change anything. All the data was collected by playing City Skyline, well, itself. And we did not really start collecting any additional data or like using the data in any other way. I mean, the way it was written, I would say it's maybe not really clear to people, and maybe it gave an impression that we would be selling their data, but the line itself was very, I would say, usual, that the data can be used with third parties, meaning that, for example, if they're playing the game, we potentially can use it on Facebook. Facebook does not really collect it. They just use it to retarget the player or so on. What I actually meant was that we did not really communicate player benefit per se. So what they found out is that the game that they played for 4 years now have a splash screen that they did not really ask or anticipate, and something was installed without their consent or without their ability. If they don't install the launcher, they were not able to play the game. So I think the fact itself that something happened and they did not really see a reason for that was our main mistake. And now there is definitely a benefit. You can learn about the new mods, you can learn about the new features. And I don't remember, when I quit Paradox, we did not really had that implemented yet, but at this point, potentially there's also a mod support where you can pretty much manage your mods. And the same thing is actually happening on all Paradox launchers, whether that would be Crusader Kings, Stellaris, and such. I think the main difference is that the launcher was introduced 4 years after the game was released. Because if the launcher would be introduced day one, no one, or like at least not many people would care because that's the default. And we have, of course, many other examples, such as, I believe, GTA or like some of the Rockstar games introduced launchers. XCOM 2 was like the recent example that introduced launcher, and also it broke the game to some extent. And we also see a lot of like negative ones. So I would say, yeah, it was on our bad not to communicate player benefit first, because it really felt to the extent that it was only benefiting us as a company, which actually did to some extent, but also, of course, there was value to the players as well, which we did not really communicate. And the same thing, actually, just on a side note, same thing with Epic Games. Everyone is hating that, but we actually see that there's no really true backlash to that. And as an example, I think about Borderlands 3, which absolutely everyone review bombed Borderlands 2, and then said that they would never buy or play Borderlands 3, but on the other hand, both on Epic Games and Steam eventually, when it was released, it was bestseller. So I think the fact itself is that we have a very vocal minority community in that when people, but the numbers and general populations shows that kind of does not really manifest for overall. So it's in a way kind of stick with your guns if you really have the data to back that up.
Okay, thanks a lot. That's great to listen.
Thank you.
And I'll give